Okay, great. Thank you all for joining us for this fantastic conversation we're about to have with Wendy Davis, who is the Democratic nominee for Texas's 21st District, which covers Austin and many other parts in that vicinity. My name is Josh Lockman. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at J Street, and I'm privileged to host and moderate this event today with you, Wendy. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
So happy to be here, Josh.
Thank you. Before I introduce Wendy formally, I just wanted to make some opening remarks. J Street was founded, as many of you know, about 12 years ago to really empower members of Congress and see through a sea change that we actually have achieved to support pro-Israel, pro-diplomacy foreign policy positions on not just Israel and the Palestinians, but also on Iran, as we saw. One seminal moment was 2015 with one of Obama's huge diplomatic achievements, besides the Paris deal, the Iranian nuclear deal, which is front and center as the number one priority that the Biden administration is going to have to encounter in the coming days and weeks in trying to resuscitate and re-enter the deal. And we will have his back and work very hard on this issue, which is of critical importance to international security as well as Israel security. But we also did tremendously well with vis-a-vis fundraising for our PAC. Last cycle was our best year on record. We raised nearly $9 million for 200 endorsees, members and candidates alike, like Wendy, as well as $2 million for President Biden. And we're proud that we have now really entered the mainstream, really between two extremes. One to our right, which represents a decaying, sclerotic, old guard mentality toward these issues, almost a BB can do no wrong mentality. And on the far left, as we know, anti-Israel animus that is pervasive, especially on college campuses. And our endorsees, like Wendy, really represent just the diversity of Democrats across the country. We have endorsed progressive candidates, those that are more on the moderate flank, and it's really shown the growth of our political machine, which is destined, I think, to become an even stronger machine. And just I'll finally add that with this new administration and it being, as you all know, a very grim year, we feel incredibly good about our position and believe that, in the short and long term, we will be the go-to foreign policy advocacy organization for Israel and the Middle East at large that the administration looks at. So we're thrilled about that. So Wendy, just to give you a little background for those that don't know her, Wendy Davis was the Democratic nominee, as I mentioned, for the 21st District in the 2020 cycle. Her race against Representative Chip Roy, and we'll talk about his odious comments in a moment, was considered a toss-up. She ultimately lost by about 7 points. Prior to that, she served as state senator and on the Fort Worth City Council. And she really rose to national prominence following a 2013 filibuster on restrictive abortion legislation in the Texas State Senate that many of you recall, and ran for governor in 2014. And lastly, she's the founder of Deeds Not Words, a nonprofit focused on women's issues and empowerment. So Wendy, you have such a prolific career of civic activism, social justice, women's rights and empowerment, and obviously a number of campaigns. So we're honored to have you here. We were honored to endorse you in your race. So thank you again. I hope I didn't leave anything out, but I'm sure there are many other activities you got involved in over the last couple of years.
Josh, it's really a delight to be here. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. I hope that my father-in-law, Stanley Schoenbaum, was able to successfully log on and join us. And a really special thank you to J Street for not only the support that you gave me in terms of introducing me to members of the J Street community and helping me to raise resources needed to run a solid, very solid race, but also the education that you gave me on so many issues that I was only about an inch deep on, and you helped me not necessarily get to a mile wide, but certainly a much greater depth of understanding about many, many foreign affairs issues. So thank you very much for inviting me today.
Absolutely. And that's a huge part of our work, our congressional education program, which is only going to grow and help to educate, frankly, members, endorsees that are challengers running against incumbents that were groomed through the local state legislature and are not as familiar with the complexity and the shades of gray that these issues, obviously produce. It's not a Manichaean world we live in. And I think what J Street and what you showed in your campaign, and obviously aligning with us, is that just as you can love America and hate our last president, I love saying that he's our last president, you can have respect for the state of Israel and criticize its current government. Again, we're in a waiting for Godot moment here, yet again. Who knows what the government is right now? But you can criticize that government while maintaining your pro-Israel bona fides. And so I think we've really inculcated that among a vast majority of members of the House and Senate and many challengers like yourself. So in the interest of time, I'll start off with my questions. For those that I'm going to ask a few questions, and then around the halfway mark or so, please feel free to put in the Q&A box questions that you have, and we will definitely get to them. But Wendy, my first question is about your opponent, who is, I won't mince words, just despicable. Last week we heard language that could have been made in antebellum America or Reconstruction era, where he used the word lynching, referring to obviously incidents that have occurred that are sickening vis-a-vis the hate crimes against Asian American, Pacific Islander Americans, and lynching as the tool of justice in Texas. And they bothered me viscerally. And I wanted to hear from you, because you ran against this man. How did you feel when you heard those words?
Extremely upset. And I would say disappointed, except this is a pattern that he has shown since he was elected and even beforehand. During our race, I felt like there were several instances in which he showed a very unbecoming racial bias in some of the comments that he made. And as a member of Congress, to sit in a public hearing and make a statement like that, it was really deplorable. And to do it as though it's reflective of the way we think and do things here in Texas, I really want to push back on. First of all, Chip Roy is not from Texas. Second of all, we don't say that in Texas. He prefaced his remarks by saying, "We've got a saying in Texas,"
Right.
and then said his awful comments.
Yeah.
No, we don't have that saying in our state. And it's not reflective of who we are. And it's not only unbecoming, but it absolutely should not be reflective of the way someone conducts themselves in Congress. And I do want to add that Chip Roy himself, during our race, on several instances, both in social media and in videos that he posted, he was very strong in his stoking the flame of anti-Asian hatred, continuing to very purposely refer to COVID as the China virus, the Chinese virus. He recorded a video defending his right to say those words, and how dare anyone tell him he can't. And to lose to someone like that, who I do not believe is reflective of who we are, and certainly not the best of what America has to offer, is very, very upsetting. But we did our best, and I'm grateful
Yeah.
for all of the help that you all gave me.
No, thank you, and thanks for explaining that distinction. That he is not from Texas, and that does not reflect Texas and the spirit of the state at all. My second question is one that many of us are getting, and a lot. I think you and many others that ran and work in democratic politics or progressive politics, I should say. Are soul searching, frankly, which is, no pun intended, but hindsight's 2020. What kind of went wrong? We saw losses in Congress like yours, regrettably. Very disappointed to see you and Mike Siegel and Sri and others in Texas and Gina not prevail. Thankfully, thank you, Stacey Abrams. We saw Warnock and Ossoff make it through. And the silver lining, the top line, is that thank God Biden won. 4 more years of Trump would have destroyed this country and this democracy. But my question for you is, as a candidate, what do you think were the biggest obstacles you encountered as you ran? Some come to mind that I was curious about. They include, the fact that we as Democrats abided by the pandemic, restrictions and that, hindered our ability to canvass throughout the year. And also there was a disconnect, frankly, and I think we're still sorting it out, between information given by reputable pollsters to campaigns and donors alike. So I'd love to hear what you think of that, because it's something I think that everyone is trying to navigate.
Absolutely. Well, let me start with kind of a 30,000-foot picture of what's happening here in Texas in terms of our trend toward the blue side of the ledger. In the last 2 presidential elections, Texas has had the second highest shift toward Democrats than any other state. Utah is the one that's had the most. We've had the second highest shift, and we've moved an average of 5.1% each of the last 2 presidential election years toward more favorable outcomes for the Democratic nominee. And we can expect that trend to continue because it's been on the rise for many years now. Secondly, Texas actually now, based on modeling, we don't register by party in our state, so we can't really accurately say this 100%, but based on modeling, it looks like right now Texas has about 51% of its eligible voting population that lean Democrat. The problem and the challenge for us is that we have not been turning our voters out as well as Republicans have turned their voters out. We registered from 2018 almost 1.5 million voters, and Republicans registered about 1.3 million voters. So we register in greater numbers, but unfortunately, their yield from that registration was higher. We turned out 61% of our modeled Democrats. They turned out 71% of their modeled Republicans. So turnout is a huge challenge for us. And it's a great challenge in a state as big as ours is. Very specifically in my election and in these other red to blue races that we had in Texas, we were so challenged by and frustrated by our inability to be on the ground. And the dynamic that impacted our inability to contact voters at their door is the same dynamic that contributes, I believe, to polling not completely capturing the sentiment and the feelings of voters. That's because low propensity voters are very difficult to reach by phone, very difficult. And that means we have an oversampling of people who are not really necessarily reflective of what's going on the ground. And so it's the same frustration that we had. We, of course, used phone banking as our means of reaching out to voters. That left a whole swath of people that we weren't able to talk to. And it's those conversations at people's doors that we have successfully had in helping people to understand who we are and why it is that the values of the Democratic Party are ones that represent the interests and the values of their families, and certainly helping them to understand that they have a personal stake in the outcome of these elections. And I think that's our greatest challenge here, helping people to know they have a personal stake in the outcome of these elections. And thankfully, the Biden administration is doing big, bold things. They are showing people what it looks like when Democrats have the authority to bring our agendas and their families' agendas forward and put into action, real action, the kinds of things that are going to make a positive difference in their lives. And I think what they're doing right now tells the best story about what Democrats are. And I'm so excited to see that in real world terms, even the low propensity voters will understand what happens in their lives when Democrats are in charge.
No, thank you for that answer. And it's an excellent segue to my next question, which is the constant question I get. I'm here in sunny Los Angeles, as I told you, and travel the country, and we're on the West and East Coast, and everybody thinks Texas, it's a matter of when, not if. And I wanted to dig deeper into the Latino electorate and the rise and mobilization of the Latino American electorate, which is diverse, very much so in Texas, as we've seen, and really ask you, when is that when coming, essentially, and to what role will the Latino electorate in Texas play, as Arizona and Georgia hopefully move into the solid blue column? How critical is that electorate, and what can we do to help?
Well, it's extremely critical, not just because we view that population in terms of their voting capacity, but it's crucial to make sure that we're electing people who reflect and represent the values, the day-to-day interests of people in the Latino community in our state. And that's not happening right now. I do want to say a few words about a lot of concern. What happened with Latino turnout in Texas, and why was the Latino vote for Donald Trump higher than expected? And I want to make sure that everyone understands that only, 78% of our Latino population lives in places across our state outside the Rio Grande Valley. Inside the Rio Grande Valley, that's where we saw Hispanic movement toward Donald Trump. And I think it was a combination of two things. Number one, higher turnout of Latino Republicans, but also we're trying to dig to the answer of why it is that some voters who normally would vote Democrat voted for Donald Trump. There's a feeling based on some anecdotal evidence right now that many people who voted for Donald Trump in the Rio Grande Valley who are Latino were so appreciative of the $1,200 stimulus checks that they received with Donald Trump's name on them. And they wanted to reward, the fact that resource, that financial resource was offered to their families in a time of great need. That's a messaging problem for us, because clearly it was Democrats that drove that train, and we all know that. And so we just have to build better ground game activities in the Rio Grande Valley. But I do want to assure everyone that in the other parts of the state, Democrats are winning the vast majority of Latino vote here, even in Texas. So yes, we have our work cut out for us. And it's very, very important I believe, because we need to make sure that the values and the interests of Latino families are being reflected at the state and the federal level here in Texas.
No, thank you. Thank you for answering that so thoroughly. So we have a question from the audience. I'm honored to ask it on her behalf. It's from Shelby Friedman, who was a huge part of our political team and a native Texan from Dallas. Shelby, I'm so glad you joined the call today, first off. And Shelby's question, Wendy, was really kind of how you were looking at the redistricting process in Texas writ large and what changes we might expect to see in the congressional map in the coming years.
So much is going to depend on whether Congress moves forward in passing voting rights protection. Just as is the case, obviously, in every other state in this country, the outcome of our redistricting lines depends on the outcome of that voting rights legislation that the House has moved over to the Senate. Here in Texas, we have historically been ground zero for what it looks like to gerrymander in a way that has silenced the voices of so many voters in our state. And we have been locked in court battle after court battle after court battle over this issue. Right now, it looks like Texas is going to add probably 3 congressional seats, depending on the outcome of the census information. And those 3 seats, of course, Republicans are going to try to do everything they can to make sure they skew the map as favorable to Republicans as possible. They are going to have a challenge on their hands, though. Central Texas, which includes Austin and San Antonio, and North Texas, which includes the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and Harris County, each of those has exponentially grown, and they've exponentially grown blue. And as a consequence of that, Republicans are going to have a really hard time slicing and dicing. You know how they crack and pack, right? They crack Democrats apart as much as they can, and they pack as many as they can into Democratic districts so that they can maximize the number of Republicans that they win. And so I think we're going to see a great deal of disagreement at the state legislative level. I fought this battle in 2011, tooth and nail, and we're going to continue to fight because the census numbers are going to come so late for us. It's going to be really interesting to see how we manage to come to some kind of understanding about what our districts will look like in time for the next congressional elections.
No, thank you. And by the way, we at J Street support this bill, and thank you for all your efforts on working on it. It's critical. I wanted to circle back, Wendy, really to the question of money in politics and what we frankly get out of it. You were an extremely successful fundraiser, many nonpartisan outlets, and we know there's partisans on both sides, really considered your race a toss-up. What do you believe are some of the limits of candidate fundraising from your race? Like what, in your view, looking back, and I know it's relatively fresh, but what would have made a difference given your prowess in fundraising and the fact that you are a national figure? I'm just curious to hear.
Sure, and that's such a good question. The most important thing that we can do, of course, is to pass campaign finance reform. I'll tell you just personally what I dealt with in my race. I raised almost $11 million. I think I raised more than any other congressional challenger in the country. And in spite of raising that much money, and thank you to every person who may be joining us today who contributed to that effort, I appreciate it so very much. In spite of that, and in spite of the fact that I dramatically outraised my opponent, more than double what he raised in the cycle, there are some big gorillas that are out there making sure that people like Chip Roy can hold their seats. One of them, and the one that was the biggest gorilla in my race, was the Club for Growth. The Club for Growth outbought television time, outspent us on television. They covered the costs of, gosh, at least a dozen mail pieces for Chip Roy. They paid for phone, texting, GOTV work, registration work, and even paid for door-to-door knocking in the district on behalf of Chip Roy. They wanted to keep their guy in Congress, and they were willing to do everything it took to make sure that that happened. And again, because we couldn't be on the ground, which is typically how we try to make up that uneven playing field, it really left us on an uneven playing field. And so the best answer I have, not just for my race, but every race, is that we pass campaign finance reform so that these limited special interests can no longer weigh so heavily in these races that they dictate the outcomes.
I couldn't agree more with what you just said. Thank you. My final question is, it's a fun one. It's one that gets asked a lot, and you have a tremendous following and amazing supporters across the board in your backyard and nationally, as you know, folks like Heidi Schoenfeld. Hi, Heidi. Thank you for tuning in. But the question is kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and the question is, are you going to run again?
I would love to run again. I don't know quit. And I guess that I will say that is a Texas value, unlike what Chip Roy said was a Texas value.
Good.
We don't know quit. And I would love the opportunity to serve in some capacity, and will certainly be watching and expressing my opinion as redistricting gets underway here in Texas. I hope for a good outcome for Central Texas and an opportunity to run again.
That's great to hear, and we would love for you to run again on a personal and J Street level. So thank you for validating my and Heidi and those that are tuning in that obviously would love to see you in Congress. So just to close, before I give you a chance, Wendy, just to give some closing remarks, I want to thank you for joining today's conversation. For those that we had a very healthy attendance, and for those that weren't able to tune in, we are going to be posting this on our what's called Conference on Demand. As many of you know, we're having a huge and really impactful national conference on April 18th and 19th. It will be done via Zoom, but not Zoom, but with a really unique technological interfacing. And it will be jam-packed with sessions featuring the best and the brightest in Biden's kitchen cabinet and foreign policy, and really feature as well leading figures from the Israeli political movement, the civil action movements, and obviously Palestinian leaders as well, along with think tank experts that are advising the administration, even if they're not in it, and some surprise guests, I'm sure. So I hope you all can attend. And Wendy, we'd love for you to attend. The way to sign up, it's pretty easy. You go to jstreet.org/conference. And I know all of you will enjoy it. And this conversation is just an example of one of many sessions we'll be having with members, candidates, and obviously high-level leaders in the Biden administration vis-a-vis foreign policy. So thank you, Wendy, so much for joining. I'd love for you to just give some closing remarks if you want.
Thank you, Josh. And again, thank you to J Street for all of the support. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you for the support that you gave me in my race. And I just want to close by saying, please don't give up on us here in Texas. We are moving in the right direction. And I know, I don't just believe, I know that we are going to turn blue in the not too distant future. And that
I'm
will
knocking
be
on wood, but yes.
That will be because we held on to the idea that we can be disappointed, but not be discouraged. because discouragement leads to giving up. We're not giving up on our state. I'm never going to give up on Texas, and I hope you won't either.
Thank you so much. I'll say on a personal level, I won't give up either. And part of my new role as Director of Strategic Initiatives is to grow our salience in Texas. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time in your backyard in Austin and looking forward to seeing you in real life. There's tremendous opportunity, not only to turn Texas blue, but to grow J Street salience in that state, which is such a, as you said, critical state for so many reasons. So Wendy, thank you again so much for joining today, and looking forward. I hope you can make it to the conference, and otherwise looking forward to seeing you in real life very soon.
All right. Take care.
You too. Thanks again to everyone who tuned in. Bye-bye.